Cool. So because Berlin has such a strong Stellar community, I figured a lot of people already know what Stellar is about, how it works, and what we're trying to do. So I'm not going to focus this presentation on the basics. I'm going to focus more on what's new, what's changed, how we've evolved over the past year or so. But before I get into that, I will say a little bit about what Stellar is doing, just in case anybody is new to the community. So Stellar is an open network for payments. The big problem we're trying to solve is the lack of efficiency in the way that value is transferred around the world. So there's a lot of different types of value, but one of the largest flows and transfers of value in the world is that of cross-border payments. And there's a lot of friction in the way that cross-border payments are affected today. And that's the specific use case that Stellar is designed to help improve. And so the reason why cross-border payments are tough, they're expensive and take a lot of time, is because there's disparate payment schemes around the world. So in Europe there's SEPA, as I'm sure everybody here is familiar with. In America there's ACH, Asia has its own, Africa has its own, et cetera, et cetera. And they don't interoperate well together. So there exists something called the correspondent banking model that connects them all together, but it's quite slow and expensive because it's very outdated. And so what Stellar exists to do is to say, why don't we represent every currency in the world, dollars, euros, yen, et cetera, on one decentralized platform? And we'll have banks and financial institutions issue tokens representing these currencies. And in this way, they're all going to be speaking the same language. That's what Stellar does. And so to do this, we use something called an issuer model, which is simply to say that we work with partners that issue value on the network. Stellar, on its own, is just a ledger, and it's nothing without the actual issuers or entities who come and issue value on the network. The value can be, like I said, dollars, euros, yen, et cetera, or it could be fractional ownership of real estate or artwork, et cetera, et cetera. So why is this important? It's because we're bridging traditional infrastructure, or the traditional way that value is represented and transacted, with something new and more efficient, with modern technology. And so that is the first step in our ultimate goal, which is making money move like email. There should be no reason why, in this day and age, money doesn't flow as seamlessly and cheaply and quickly as email does. And so if some of you are more familiar with something like Bitcoin or maybe other decentralized technologies, what makes Stellar different? There's a few reasons. These are just three of them. One is that it allows you to represent multiple types of value. So not just cryptocurrency. For example, the Bitcoin network only has one asset on it, Bitcoin. In Stellar, you can have Bitcoin, you can have dollars, you can have Boris coin, which I highly recommend. It's very energy efficient because it's not based on proof of work. It has a completely different consensus algorithm, which means that it doesn't use tons and tons of electricity. It also makes it fast and scalable in comparison to proof of work systems. And something interesting that a lot of people don't know, because we don't do a good job of talking about it, is that it has a built-in decentralized exchange. So why does it have a built-in decentralized exchange? Because when a bank issues dollars and another bank issues euros, that foreign transaction, the foreign exchange piece, needs to happen somehow. And so the decentralized exchange allows market makers to say, hey guys, we're buying dollars and we're selling euros. And that's how that transaction goes. And then there will be another bank that's buying Nigerian naira and selling euros. And so it's a marketplace for different types of value. And that's part and parcel of the network. To show you a kind of a visual representation of this, this is Stellar X, which is a product that we built about half a year ago. So it's fairly new. Stellar X is a is a UI that sits on top of this decentralized exchange that I just mentioned. So StellarX is a way to glimpse into the ledger and see what's in it. What are the different assets that you can buy? And so on the left, you can see a small selection of the assets that are available. You can see there's US dollars, there's Bitcoin, there's other tokens. Kik is a messenger app that has its own token. And then if you look here, this is the issuer column, which tells you who is the issuer of this asset. And there's a big difference between a large bank that's issuing $1 and Boris Bank that's issuing $1. If you click into the plus here, you'll see it explodes the different types of US dollar assets. So you can have multiple issuers of a particular asset. In this case, we have 5 US dollar anchors. They each have slightly different fee structures, different flows and policies. And essentially, it's up to the user to decide which one of these they trust. Fund Tracker, for example, is kind of a weird name for a USD anchor, so maybe don't use that one. Just my personal opinion. So that's a little bit about the basics. Happy to answer any questions that you might have after the talk. So what's new? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the evolution of Stellar, about our approach, about what we're doing, because it does change. Yes, a new logo, right there. That is very important. That's one of the changes. It's long overdue, in my opinion, but we're quite happy with the result. So the first evolution that I'm going to talk about is the evolution of our audience. So when we first started commercializing Stellar, going out to the public and saying, hey guys, we built this really cool technology, use it, let's work together. The first kind of group of people that we started approaching were banks. We started with small to medium-sized banks because they are more willing to try new technologies, they're less averse to risk. But we found that they're still not very averse to risk, so it turns out. And so we decided that the best strategic direction was to not work with banks, but work with MTOs, which are money transfer organizations. So these are the biggest example, of course, is Western Union, but there's a lot, it's a very fragmented long tail of money transfer organizations. And these are companies that compete on slim margins. They are not as close to the correspondent banking model that I described earlier. And so they are actually, if anybody is incentivized to use something that reduces the cost of transaction and increases the speed, it would be money transfer organizations around the world. And we spoke to companies in Kenya and Argentina and Amsterdam and Ivory Coast and all around the world. And we started gaining some traction there. But the level of sophistication varies drastically around the world. And so whereas you might be used to working with companies that have APIs, not every company around the world has APIs. And so that slows down the time of integration. And so what we found is that actually fintech companies, like a SatoshiPay, for example, are actually the best suited entities to play this anchor role. And when I say anchor, I'm talking about an institution that represents value on the ledger and essentially acts as an on and off ramp. It lets you deposit value, fiat, usually fiat currency, onto the ledger and withdraw it back into your bank account, for example. And that is around the same time that we established a partnership with IBM. And this is, we're extremely happy with this partnership because IBM is filling a critical gap in the ecosystem. So if you think about the stack in payments, Stellar sits at the very bottom. It's low-level infrastructure. It's a protocol. It's like SMTP for email. You can think of it that way. At the top of the stack, there are the actual financial institutions, the banks, the MTOs, et cetera. And in the middle, what was missing this whole time is something that we refer to as a network operator. And that is what IBM is doing with their WorldWire product. So WorldWire is a network operator that provides a service to financial institutions. So things like having a dedicated sales team that knows how to call into banks, things like treasury management services, things like compliance and support. You know, banks need to have somebody to call when something goes wrong. And essentially, what this does is it reduces the coordination cost of building a cross-border payment network like this. Because as you all know, the technology is already there. It's a human problem. It's a coordination problem. And that's what value that WorldWire exists to provide. So we're super excited about this. It actually shipped already, so it's a real thing. They're actively onboarding customers right now. I'm sure they're not processing millions or billions of dollars quite yet, but it's a live product that is growing every day. So we're super excited about that. So that's a little bit about the evolution of our audience. And that has allowed us to have an evolution of use cases. So when we were spending all of our time talking to banks or MTOs, we were really focusing on one sliver of the payments space, which is remittances. But having a player like WorldWire take up remittances and B2B payments, by the way, allows us to also play in the P2P space, so peer-to-peer payments, as well as micropayments, which is what SatoshiPay is doing with publishers. So we're basically filling in each category with the best-in-class partners that can help us achieve the goal of representing all types of value on Stellar in an efficient way. So another use case that came up in 2018 and has evolved quite a bit is that of asset digitization. And this is a topic that a lot of people are interested in these days, and it started in 2017 with the rise of ICOs, which was interesting in a lot of different ways and hilarious in others. And what we saw is that regulation caught up, or reality, I should say, caught up with people. And so what happened was the ICO paradigm gradually and organically, I would say, shifted into the STO paradigm, or representing real-world value in a regulated way with tokens. And so fundraising is a major component of this. People are doing STOs to raise funds. So Bitbond is a great example. I think Radko was here last time talking about what they're doing with bonds on Stellar. Or Smartlands is a company that's currently tokenizing a real estate development project in the UK. And then Weavest, Didier will explain in just a second. And actually, we've seen the most uptick here in STOs in Europe, surprisingly, or maybe not. Life is tough in the States. But it's been really encouraging to see STOs starting to increase in number. These are just 3 examples off the top of my head that happen to all be in Europe. And so a question that I'm asked quite often is, what's the difference between Ethereum and Stellar when it comes to asset digitization, or tokenizing real-world assets? And again, like most things, there's a number of reasons, but I think 3 of the more salient ones are the following. So, and I should say that Ethereum is the default choice for this. I think most ICOs and most STOs as well have been done on Ethereum, but there's a number of interesting differences in the approach to this. And so the first is how the token is actually created and administered and managed. In Ethereum world, every token is its own smart contract. And you bake in all of the trade restrictions into that smart contract, which allows you to do very interesting things, but it's extremely hard to manage over time. You can't just go and make a change to the smart contract. You have to pull it off the chain, and everything goes down for a while until you fix it, and then you reload it. And this happened, I think, with Blockchain Capital, which was one of the first security tokens that was launched. It's extremely powerful, but once it's there, it's very inflexible and it's hard to work with. And so the Stellar approach to this same problem, the problem of enforcing trade restrictions on securities, is to essentially you write a code in JavaScript. You write a rule set that lives in a normal program on a server, and you enforce signature of that rule set for every transaction. And so every transaction involving a security then requires two signatures, one from the user and one from the rule set. And this rule set is very easy to make changes to as necessary as legislation evolves, because it just lives in a JavaScript program, for example. Fiat anchors, so I talked a lot about this already. Stellar specializes in having fiat represented on the ledger, which means that if you have a real estate tokenization project, you can do distributions in dollars or euros as opposed to crypto, which I think is more attractive for a lot of investors. And then there's the SDEX, which is the Stellar Decentralized Exchange that I touched on briefly in the beginning, which means that it's a native place for liquidity. It's a native place that you can go list your token. And I'll touch more on this in a second. So another evolution that I think is worth mentioning is the evolution of our approach to the market. Stellar has always been a platform play. We built a platform, and we hoped that people would come, and they did. And we're very fortunate and happy about that. WorldWire is one major example, but there's literally hundreds of others, and many of them are represented here. And what's interesting now is that we're starting to venture more into the product space. We're building products that we think deserve to exist in the Stellar ecosystem. Stellar X is the first example of this. So, we had this really robust decentralized exchange with a lot of interesting assets represented on it. There was no good way to interact with it. Your average person isn't going to go interact with the API to go trade assets. And so we said, you know what, we're going to build it ourselves. And so that was Stellar X. It was pretty popular. I think it's a pretty smooth product. And so one update about Stellar X is that it was recently acquired by a company called Coinsquare. Coinsquare is Canada's largest exchange. It's kind of like the Coinbase of Canada. And they have the regulatory experience and the regulatory framework that's necessary to run Stellar X the way it deserves to be run. So in order for securities, for example, to be listed, even on a decentralized exchange, there needs to be a certain level of regulatory licensing that you have. And we don't have that, but Coinsquare does. And so we're super excited for Stellar X to be in such good hands. And the next product that we are working on is in the P2P space. And I can't tell you too many details about this yet, but we're going to translate the same really smooth and slick user experience that we did with Stellar X into a global peer-to-peer payments app. And then I'm sure many of you guys are interested in the tech part. What's new here? We are spending a lot of time thinking about the degree of decentralization of the Stellar network. There's, I don't know how many nodes there are today, somewhere in the hundreds, I believe. SatoshiPay has some of them, and we appreciate that. But the goal is for SDF, which is Stellar Development Foundation, to not need to exist. The goal is that we should be able to take down our servers, our nodes, and everything continues smoothly. And so we are pretty much at that point now. And so I think soon you may see exactly that happening. Scalability. So we are fortunate in that we have a lot of headroom in terms of scalability as compared to other decentralized ledgers. We are nowhere near the limit of what Stellar can do, but we know we'll get there soon. or at some point we will definitely get there. And so we need to continue to push the envelope in terms of scalability. There's a few ways that we're doing that. One is just continual core improvements, so pushing the boundary of the existing way that the Stellar protocol functions. But there's also new technologies like the Lightning Network, which we continue to make progress on, that'll push scalability quite a ways further. And then in privacy, this is something that a lot of people are interested in. Privacy is something that you increasingly see in headlines, well, both in Europe and increasingly in America. And so we have this project called Slingshot, which uses a bunch of buzzwords, which I will now say. Bulletproof-based ZK VM sidechain layer. All jokes aside, it's a way to introduce a layer of privacy onto Stellar. And I'll save the details for somebody who actually knows them. So what's on the horizon? What can we expect going forward? We're going to continue focusing on quality anchors. So anchors, again, are financial institutions that issue fiat currencies on the ledger and allow you to deposit and withdraw in various currencies. And so what we care about is more reputable issuers. So we want to go from, we've already reached a very good level of reputability, but we want to go even further. We want for there to be real trust in these institutions. We want global coverage. We want not just the major currencies represented, but every currency represented. And we want greater interoperability. So some of these anchors do things differently. We want them all to do it the same. So that if you're building an app and you want to serve customers in Kenya and you want to serve customers in Laos, you can do it very easily and in the same exact way around the world. And so this is an example. This is a recent announcement that we did just a few weeks ago with a British company called WireX. They've existed for a long time. They are partnering with us to launch 26 stablecoins representing 26 different world currencies that will push us towards this goal. And CoinSquare, by the way, is doing quite the same. So very, very excited about that. We're going full production mode for a lot of major ongoing projects. So like I mentioned, WorldWire has shipped, it's fully live, and we expect them to reach actual real substantial volumes of payments very soon. Peer-to-peer payments, we're working on something cool there. Stellar X in the hands of CoinSquare. I think we're going to see some very interesting things in terms of the different types of assets that are traded on there, as well as other usability improvements. And then, as always, there's always other stuff going on that I am not at liberty to talk about in specifics, but that you'll see soon. And so I'll close by saying, Stellar is a fast and virtually free system that imagines money moving like email at the end of the day. And I think we're very much making progress on that mission. It's not an easy one, but we've been at it for a number of years now, and we're excited about what the future holds. So with that, thank you very much. I will stop talking now. Thank you, and happy to take questions at the end. Are we taking questions now? Yeah, take questions. Okay.
Hi, my name is Marcin. I run a transport company based in London, and we have a lot of subcontractors all over Europe. So we pay them like €200 to €3,000 for this freight cost. So with banking, it's like 3 to 5 days. It's done. Very excited about Stellar. So could you please develop a little bit about P2P payments? How it's going to progress in time scale?
Yep. Yeah, so that's exactly where WorldWire comes in. And WorldWire right now is focusing on step one. Well, step one is to build the product. They've done that. Step two is to onboard financial institutions. That will be the on and off points to the various countries. And step three is to onboard businesses that will be the customers of this. The banks are kind of the the rails, so to speak, and the customers are companies like yours. So WorldWire is built to address exactly the problem that you just described. It's not as long as you think. I mean, can you use it today? In your case specifically? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know if you said it's in Poland? Well, no, your business partners don't even need to know that it's on Stellar. In fact, the way that WorldWire works, if you go to the website right now, you don't see any blockchain, you don't see any Stellar. It's just fast, cheap payments.
The peer-to-peer product that you're building, I wonder, I was working on a company that needed some of this infrastructure. Anonymity and offline payments, are either of those part of it? And if not, how might you partner with another company to achieve something like that? Or is it even in the roadmap?
So anonymity is definitely on the roadmap. Right now, there's a lot of things you can do to mask payments. So the way that people are connected to addresses, there's a number of different ways to architect that. And one of the ways, for example, is for a bank or an app to just have a pool account. So not every individual user has their own Stellar account. And so then there's full anonymity. You have no idea who is sending how much to whom because you're using a pooled account and not one for each user. And then you asked about offline payments. There's a number of companies that are working on this. One in Paris, actually, called Unbound, I believe. I'm happy to make an introduction there. I think you should ask the SatoshiPay guys. They, right there. The question is, how much does it cost to run a node?
That depends pretty much on whether you want to store the client history. It's a bit expensive, but I think they're around 700 euros a month. No, 400. No.
There's a lot of different levels of nodes. You can have a listener node. Yeah, that's much cheaper. It's like a medium-sized Amazon AWS instance. Or you can have a full node with full history, and that's obviously more expensive. That's a great question. It's not a war, it's a competition. And we like competition, and we think it yields better products. And so, we're not in a position, well, first of all, we couldn't be exclusive if we wanted to. Stellar, at the end of the day, is an open network that anybody can join. And so, let's say we wanted to make it exclusive to one US dollar anchor, we couldn't do that if we tried. And so we actually want and encourage multiple anchors for the same currency because at the end of the day, it's the one that provides the smoothest experience and the best rates that's going to win.
Further question about the same topic. So nowadays, this IBM plus Wirex stablecoin platforms out there. So are they going to be available for SDX users, or is it going to be closed ecosystem inside Stellar?
So that's one of the really awesome things about the Wirex partnership is that it's open, which means that they don't stay in the Wirex ecosystem. They can be traded on SDEX, but even more interesting than that, your app can use them. So your app can use an on-ramp for, Vietnamese dong through this.
I want to follow to the Stellar Build Challenge, which ended last year, I guess.
Yep. So the question was, what happened to the Stellar Build Challenge, and what has replaced it? And by the way, this row, for some reason, is really active with questions. Good job. So the Stellar Build Challenge, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, was a program that we ran where we said, hey, build cool stuff on Stellar, and there will be a panel of judges that chooses winners, and we'll fund your project that way. And we got a lot of really cool stuff through this. However, the problem with this was that people would build a minimum viable product, get the money, and then move on to other things. And so we got a bunch of half-baked results out of it. And so what we decided to do instead is what's called the Stellar Developer Fund, which is a different pool of funds that's more proactive in terms of identifying gaps in the ecosystem and filling them. And so an example of that is we said, you know, what does everybody need? One thing everybody needs is a really good block explorer. And so we went to the best existing block explorer. It's called Stellar Expert. And we said, let's fund you to make it awesome. And so that's what we did, and that's an example of how the Stellar Developer Fund works, is we identify gaps and we proactively fill them with this program. There's also a new program that you might find interesting, which is called the Stellar Community Fund, which is a pool of money that we allocate for the community, which is you guys, to vote on how you want it to be spent. And so the mechanism is through Reddit, through the Stellar subreddit. The community gets to vote on the best and coolest and most useful projects, and the money is funded. Those projects get funded.
I think we have to come to the final question. Is there one more? Your turn.
May I ask about the Stellar Dex? You mentioned before that with Stellar X there was a problem for having the license and fulfilling the compliance. But as far as I understand, Stellar X is just the interface to interact with your Dex. Don't you see any compliance risk there running the Dex on your protocol? Or is it for you just the interface communicating with the Dex that is reliable?
Yeah, great question. So when we built Stellar X, the idea was exactly that, which is it's just an interface to a decentralized thing, nothing more. And so we were hopeful that we didn't actually need to run it as a licensed securities exchange, because it's just a skin. It's a skin of something fully decentralized. But then in light of some other DEXs that basically ran into trouble in the States, I forget the name of the particular case, but we realized that our interpretation of the regulatory environment was not necessarily the correct one. And so we wanted to make sure that StellarX was run in the best possible way. And we realized that, yes, we could go out and get licensed and try to run it that way, but it would take forever. We don't have the experience to do that. We're a technology company. We don't have these kind of licensing. We've never run a securities exchange. And so in CoinSquare, we found a partner that does have everything that they need, or is at least moving and very close to getting it. And so that's essentially why that transaction occurred, and ownership was granted to CoinSquare because they are much better suited to run it, even though it is just an interface to a DEX.
Isn't there a compliance risk with the DEX itself or the SDX?
There is no compliance risk to the DEX. Sorry if I misunderstood your question. Thanks. There's no compliance risk to the DEX because that part is fully decentralized. So we cannot control what gets listed on it. You could go issue, scam coin, and we literally couldn't do anything about it because it's decentralized. And so that is actually a very strong argument that does hold up in the face of regulatory constraints. However, the layer above that actually lets users interact with it is the part where things get a little more fuzzy.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.